turn the sound off. I don't know how to turn it.
From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to a new episode of my videocast, Film Music Live, where I talk to today's top composers and you can ask them your questions. I'm happy to have you here. He's embodied the rhythmic metal of the Fast and the Furious franchise, propelled the violent symphonic brawn of Rambo, and put on the dynamic cape of any number of Marvel Avengers, not to mention showing a more tender romantic side for Crazy Rich Asians. But where Brian Tyler has often played heroic masculinity, it's often been in the company of big-screen special effects-driven pictures, even when impressive under-the-radar scores like Panic, Last Call, and Partition marked his career's start. While Brian Tyler has since explored the TV arena with Hawaii Five-0, Swamp Thing, and Scorpion, no project big or small screen has given him the opportunity to seriously flex his dramatic musical muscles like writing The High Country of Paramount's Yellowstone over the course of 3 seasons, the third of which is now airing to smash ratings on the Paramount network. As created by Taylor Sheridan, whose work has often shown the dark side of the contemporary Old West with Hell or High Water and Wind River, Yellowstone stands tall as another mythic, modern-day take on cowboys, Native Americans, and the city slickers out to destroy their way of life. One can also look back to Dallas to see Yellowstone's roots in the glorious TV primetime soap opera of a grandly dysfunctional family dynasty. Here it's the Duttons, who will do anything to maintain the ranch they've held on for generations, whether it's destroying their rivals or each other in the bargain. It's a vast landscape of deviousness, violence, sex, and above all moral myth-making that's given true majesty by Brian Tyler's scoring. With a rich orchestra capturing the wilderness and its hard-bitten inhabitants, Tyler's folksy music also captures a poignantly nostalgic, never say die, kill or be killed pioneer spirit. His rich tapestry of melody playing the Western groove whose white and black cowboy hats are often interchangeable. Now, here to talk about a family saga that just keeps getting bigger and more emotionally evocative is Yellowstone composer Brian Tyler. Welcome to Film Music Live, Brian.
Hi, how you doing?
Great to have
Good
you
to
here.
see you. Thank you.
As always, we're dealing with the delay that's going on between me and you.
We'll just talk on top of each other. It'll be fine.
It'll be like a Robert Altman thing.
Okay.
So, listening to the scores that were at the very beginning of your career, they're very dramatic and also very different from, this kind of mega multiplex composer you'd become. And Yellowstone is really, I believe, the first kind of Western excursion you've made. Was this something you saw yourself doing, and how did you come on board the show?
Well, I always loved Westerns. I mean, it's funny. In a way, if you go back to my roots, let's Six String Samurai, there's kind of a Western thing there, but it was more of a spaghetti Western. I mean, that's like one of my first two movies, back in the day. And I'd worked with Shane Black on a Western, but it never ended up going as a pilot. But really what got me interested in this particular story was Taylor Sheridan. And I love his writing and his directing, and he's just, he takes things from an angle that isn't usually, to be expected. So I knew with this that it would be something interesting. And so when we talked about it early on, and the idea of creating a really mythic, textural kind of story and a tale that could have music that spoke to the heart, but also was dark, and live music, and we got to record orchestra, but interesting instruments, and kind of going outside the box in the sense that it isn't really necessarily Western music. It's more music from the roots of what Western music in the United States really was, which was a music of immigrants. It's instead of the Stradivarius violins of Europe, is that people left Europe for a reason, or all over the place, from all over the globe, and brought their instruments, but they're the humble instruments. That's why you have fiddle and hurdy-gurdy and things like that. So I really wanted to explore where those instruments came from. So that's why it has that kind of, more of a lament kind of feel to the music. The theme is very much a lament, almost like music that, is like dirges and things like that, to mark sad occasions, basically. So that interested me. I love dark music, so it was something to go for.
Now Lillian Kim, who's a double, I'm sorry, she's a composer and also a double cellist. She actually gets to a good question that I wanted to start off with as well. Is, when you were kind of developing your orchestral chops, was this the kind of the Yellowstone approach something that you saw orchestrally going in? Does this kind of fulfill any grand ambitions you had in that orchestral front?
Well, yeah, it's cool because it's a different style of orchestra. It's not just big and blown out. We're not going for these aren't superheroes, you know what I mean? So in the sense, going with the chamber kind of ensemble is combining kind of some modern stylistic, almost like Icelandic orchestral chamber style, but with solo instruments that are written more in like an Arabic kind of vibe. Combining those and having the strings where you can really hear the individuals. So it's not 100 people in the orchestra where everything gets very smoothed out and feels very polished. The strings and all the instruments kind of have that chamber ensemble feel, where you can really hear the rosin on the strings, like the cello solos, there's viola solos, and you can literally have them in the room playing and you can hear them. And also the idea of not polishing off the rough edges of the music. More than 2 takes, the musicians were too good and it would start sounding too perfect. So I would always want to go for take 1 or take 2 when there's a little bit of tentativeness and edginess and a little bit of tuning things, that very human, trying to find the right bowing or moving the hand. It's just kind of all that human error is beautiful, I think. And so orchestrally, this was a different lane for me, whereas often I'm asked to do something very polished and pristine, and this really has the opposite feel.
You know, it's interesting that two of my favorite early scores that you've done are Children of Dune and
Right.
Partition. Just really beautiful, sweeping orchestral scores. And in a way, kind of what you've done with Yellowstone is like their very distant cousin. I mean, do you think that's a fair comparison?
Yeah, I think that is because, well, the two, in fact, you nailed it. In terms of how things are written, Children of Dune and Partition both were based on the idea of writing music that sounded like folk melodies or traditional laments. Partition, of course, being a movie that took place in India, so it has that. The melodies are all things that sound like something that someone would sing, like a lullaby. Children of Dune, the same thing, but that was slightly more Arabic based because of the Fremen and the characters in the novels. Even the language was very akin to Arabic. So kind of that kind of ancient folk melody that could be played on a solo instrument is so close to the ways people would sing, and really you connected the probably the three projects that are most alike in terms of wanting to have that lament kind of soloistic folk melody as the basis of the score, but then with kind of support of orchestra. And it's that combining of those two things that I think gives it a nice contrast and something that can be very much of the soul. Like you feel that kind of music. That's why laments and things like that are you know, played at funerals, and why you have also the celebratory music is like very traditional folk weddings and different things to mark occasions. Music's always been there, and this borrows from that style more than it would like classical or neoclassical melody writing.
You know, one thing that really strikes me as well when you listen to, you know, the TV scores is again, it's incredibly melancholy and very sad.
Yeah.
Although there's a lot of great action in it, and that's the great thing about Taylor Sheridan's writing is that these characters are as good as they are evil. Where they do this, you know, the heroes suddenly start doing absolutely despicable things. How much does that kind of ambiguity in the characters play into what you're doing?
Well, I mean, the characters. So Taylor really he writes these amazing characters. They're so dense, and then I feel that on season three, it often shows kind of take off, and they really get their wings on season three. It's like that's where you get that term from Star Trek Next Generation when a show gets its beard, where Riker came back after the summer and had a beard, and all of a sudden the show became incredible, right? It's because the first two seasons of anything you have to set up, especially season one, you have to set up the characters. You have to have a baseline so you know when these characters do something out of character that it contrasts with what you know, and that's when you get your surprises. That's when characters become interesting. You can't do that from the get-go, otherwise you're going to think that that's what that character is as a baseline. So for instance, you have characters in Yellowstone that we saw as so empathetic and so like pure, or what, let's just take that as an example. They all of a sudden do things that are unexpected in season three. Well, you wouldn't be able to have that if you didn't set it up already. So in a sense, the darkness, and I think Yellowstone plays in the grays, all the shades of it amazingly, because the melancholy and the darkness of it is so interesting, because you see characters that you really feel like, oh, I'm siding, I relate to this character, and then they do something super messed up, and you're like, what the what do you do at that point, just as a viewer? And so musically, it's time for, it's great because I'm able to take these themes that had to define someone along the spectrum, good, evil, somewhere in between, and now it's all kind of moving and getting more liquid. And so, and I love writing melancholy and dark music. I mean, it's I just find it to be the most soulful. So in a sense, that's why this season is so exciting to me, and it's amazing. I mean, I wish you knew what, like, it's wild. and I loved him. I loved doing the music for it.
Now, our second Yellowstone question is from Louis Virtullini. And I mean, I could tell you who my favorite character is. It's without a doubt Cole Hauser because he's got the Wings Hauser blood
Oh
running through
yeah,
him.
yeah, no doubt, man. Like yeah, Rip
I love
Wheeler,
that guy.
like yeah, in Cole, he's a great actor, and I scored something like 20 years ago that he was in, and no, yeah, about 15, yeah, two things, 15 years ago, yeah, Paparazzi, he was the main character, but he's just so good, and you know that last episode of season 2, where he's basically
Oh,
this
yeah.
sacrificial, like he's going to go headlong into this impossible situation on a horse to draw fire from, and instead of going with action music there, that decision by Taylor and I to go with an adagio and this sad solo cello and like it was so counter, but Cole is an actor that he like carries the day, and you can do something like that and you just believe it, and it just makes it way cooler. But anyway, what's the question? Sorry.
So Louis' question is kind of a two-part thing. Who is your favorite character to score? And when you were at Harvard, did you eat at Mr. Bartley's Burger Cottage?
Yeah, no, gosh, I try to think of all the names of the place, like God, like right, one of the places I almost went every day. I get these, it's Boston, I get these Philly cheesesteaks. There's like this place right off where Cronkite is, and yeah, I frequented all the places and the bars and everything like that, but yeah, I'm a big burger guy, so no doubt. And then, favorite character. Oh yeah. You know what? I think you know what's interesting? I mean, it's hard not to say like John. I mean, you have the patriarch that it kind of, it's the first scene I scored with him and that horse and the car accident in season 1, and he kind of anchored it. But Beth is so interesting, and Jamie. I love characters where you can't figure out whether or not you should be rooting for them. I mean, you do, but they do things that you're like, damn, I don't know about that move, and so again, the less defined the moral center is of a character, I think the more interesting is to watch. So, but you know what? I got to say that, I mean, you're behind Rip like all the way, Team Rip, and he's fascinating as well. But yeah, I really, I'm sorry. I wish I could say definitely one character over the rest, but yeah, go Crimson.
Now Kevin Costner really is an actor who represents the West. I mean, you've got Wyatt Earp. What kind of gravitas does he as an actor bring to your approach? And just the
Yeah,
history
I
of
mean,
films.
Wired Up Dances with Wolves. I mean,
Dance with Wolves, of course.
the dude, right? I mean, he's the real deal. Not only that, but he's a great director, and he's a musician and he's a singer and all these things. And so it's kind of so, and he's also a producer on the show. And he can just kind of do a lot with very little, like, just to look, he just knows to not overdo it. And that leaves me room to say a lot with the music. I think as time has gone too, there's been this thing that the Taylor will shoot these scenes where it's, a dolly or lock off or something just on Kevin, and he's thinking, and the music's going to say what's in his mind. And as he's watched the show, he's gotten kind of, it's a cool thing. It's like it's like a working together. It's like a dance, and he knows what I'm gonna do. It's like, oh, Brian's gonna come in here and say what's in my mind, and then he'll give notes to Taylor, and and then Taylor relays, whatever he's thinking, this is what we want you to say. So, but he's a giant. He's incredible. When I met him, it was like, I mean, what do you? Those people. I've been working with a lot of people where I grew up watching them. Like Tom Cruise and De Niro and Costner, and just a lot of kind of these actors that I grew up watching, and it was always surreal to work with them and get to know them. But I've been very fortunate that they've been very kind and smart, and they know their cinema and they know their music, and Kevin's no exception.
Now, I want to give a shout out to Lakeshore Records, who have been cool enough to give a free download of your season 2 album for the first 5 Yellowstone-centric questions. And number 3, and so everyone out there, you've got 2 more for a Yellowstone question, is from Harry Binns, and he wants to know, do you use any Western-style instruments or anything specific to creating the soundscape for Yellowstone?
Yeah, a lot of the instruments in Yellowstone would be pre-Western. So it's immigrants' instruments. So a lot of what we know is kind of, okay, so I use hurdy-gurdy and dobro and accordion, and I'm using balalaika this season, the Russian guitar, charango, different kinds of things. Now, they're occasionally, so dobro would be a perfect example of something that is associated with the Old West, which is basically a resonator guitar that is made of steel and bass. It was made to be loud because you'd be playing, and if you wanted to entertain out on the range, a regular guitar just didn't cut it. So it has this resonator in the body of it, and it just sounds so like pioneery, Also, fiddle is used quite a bit, solo fiddle. Play some banjo on it, but it's kind of like it's almost like a world score. It doesn't focus on the old American West. It's really like I use a lot of instruments from around the world to give it a little bit of a more ancient feel. So it doesn't, in a sense, like the old American West is too new to just focus on that. It's actually in musical history, it's kind of new compared to a lot of instruments from around the world, and a lot of the old Western instruments were based on instruments from around the world. So that's really what I'm going for. Does that answer the question? I don't even know. I go on tangents.
I imagine Harry would think it did. What's interesting is that back with Dallas, like one of my show I really grew up watching. I don't know if you saw it in its run. Yeah, I just love Dallas. Every Friday night I was glued to it. And the kind of threat, the existential threat through all the years that show was on, was who's going to take the Ewing's oil. And in this, the threat with every season is they're going to take the ranch. The city slickers are going to come in, and it kind of goes back to the threat of a lot of old westerns, even back to Shane, where like the guy from the big city was going to come in and destroy their homes. How do you musically capture essentially the big existential threat of the series?
Yeah, the Who Shot JR of the music. There is a looming shadow over so much of what they all do, and some of it, is creating your own prison, and which is always interesting. I love Scorsese films. It's often the tale of someone that creates their own prison, and in that way, I find that there's like a Scorsese kind of parallel as well. Shane is a great example. Actually, my grandfather was the art director on Shane. And
wow.
my grandfather did primarily westerns as an art director, True Grit, and tons of I think 20 westerns or something like that in that era. It was primarily what he did. But yeah, there's something foreboding about the tone of this modern West of warring sides and greed when you don't need to be greedy. I mean, Look at John Dutton as a character. He's got it made. He doesn't need to put, he just can't help himself. There's a power grab and you kind of get it, but at the same time, it puts his whole family at risk. And it's like the sins of the father. Literally that was the name of the cliffhanger of season 2. Sins of the father just it just keeps on going. And then it's like once one side, you know, strikes, then you have to have a reaction, and it ends up being this really, and this is such a timeless tale, you know, of you forget what you're fighting about in a way, you know, Ireland, England, on and on and on, right? It's just, you're like, what the so at a certain point they're creating their own prisons, and musically this is why, you know, the more kind of a nod to ancient dark music, the better, because it gives it kind of that grand Shakespearean tragedy feel. And I think that's how I write music, is how Taylor writes stories. So that's, I think that's why it's a really good fit.
Now I've got a question from David Organ. And what is the typical process? We know, I imagine that Taylor oversees the individual episodes, or, you know, definitely keeps a tab on what's going on. What is the process like from essentially getting an episode, getting notes and changes you make to what it finally comes out as?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because the process on, okay, so I've done a number of series over the years. I mostly do films, probably 90% films, but the thing about Taylor and this is that it's even the process of spotting and mixing and notes and shooting and all that is done closer to what you would do on a movie, the whole approach. And so we treat it, these, like, as just a 10-hour movie, and that's why we do recording sessions. And I mean, COVID's thrown a wrench into that, obviously, but we recorded so much orchestra, and then now it's playing, like, it's still all live. We want to get out of the box. The kind of music that is samples in the computer doesn't, they don't, it's not really the right sound for the show, because it, in a way, Taylor approaches so much like a movie, and there's a blurring of the line now with series where they really are done like movies. You know, so much of, I mean, you know, going back even further than like House of Cards, where you watch it and you're like, okay, this is a continuing movie, really, the style of it. And so when we watch, you know, I'll read the script, I'll watch the episode, and then, and at first it was different because I didn't know the characters, and Taylor had to impart like so much detail until, oh, no, this is what I was thinking with this shot. Now we kind of have this commonality in terms of language and knowing what it needs. So I can go in, do writing, and I'll send him music, and then he'll say, hey, do this or do that, or just like, great, you know, let's drop this in. And there's such care taken, everything from the music mix, which really careful about making it shine, and just the playing and the instrumentation and the recording, that I feel like Taylor and I have like a very smooth working relationship, in the sense that I already know what he's going to see. He's going to want to challenge me as much as possible. So I always know to push my boundaries. And in fact, I'm doing a movie with him simultaneously right now. I'm scoring Those Who Wish Me Dead, Warner Brothers movie that he's directing. And so it's a similar approach where it's totally different kind of music, but where he just wants you to push the edge of what normally you would kind of think this scene should be scored. That's why there's so many kind of counterintuitive cues in Yellowstone.
That goes to Ariel Garza's question is, you know, I imagine, you know, when this was just kind of really getting into it, that Corona hit. How have you been scoring the film? I mean, or I'm sorry, the show.
Oh my God.
You know, is there a point where it goes from orchestra to your studio?
Yeah, I mean, the fortunate part is that we start way ahead. I started recording so we record also a bunch of music that is like suites and ideas and tonal things with an orchestra that we can then use, and then I'll do solos on top of them. So record these kind of passages that are a lot of the main themes of the characters with big string section, and then I'll play cello, or I'll do some kind of mandolin or a fiddle or something over the top of it. Some of these kind of old keyboard instruments that are almost like typewriters are really strange, the dulcet tones and things like that. Anyway, so fortunately, we kind of beat COVID barely at the beginning of the year of getting some of the larger recordings done. And now, between me and Brett Vivian, who is doing the show with me, we play pretty much, we play most instruments that would be soloistic, so we can cover it. And it's really how we did season 1 and season 2. We just didn't have the COVID, but so far it hasn't really affected us. On the movie, though, it has, in the sense that I'm supposed to conduct an orchestra for the movie I'm doing with Taylor, and of course right now it's not sure what's going on with the orchestral situation, but yeah.
Well, because I have heard that there are actually orchestras that are getting back in England and Australia.
Yes.
I heard you can actually get an orchestra done. So I mean, like every season of Yellowstone has orchestral music. So I guess, would you be doing it over there, or just to get this done?
Yeah, that's just it. Is that, for instance, some of I think with the movie it was going to be in LA, so it ends up being a little trickier. You know what I mean? But I'm trying to think here if this says, I'm looking. When is this gonna? I'm trying to see. I don't. Yeah. I really know when it's coming back. I'm kind of scheduled for some days to record, but we put them down as tentative, and I just get scheduled by the studio. I have no idea. I think it's going to be done in striping, where you record strings and you record brass and you record woodwinds separately. So you know what I mean? And so I think, it's kind of like with just rolling with the punches and finding, well, maybe there's a creative way to make that really an interesting dynamic. Maybe you can do some things that you normally wouldn't do. I normally record everyone in the same room at the same time. That's kind of been my way. So it's going to be an interesting way to do it. But then again, I started my career by just playing every instrument myself because I had zero budget on my early movies, and that kind of creates its own sound too. So it's hard to say. I was only I think a day away from recording Fast and Furious at Abbey Road when the quarantine happens. Fast and Furious 9. So we've got. I literally about to record. So we're just putting that off, and because the movie moved by a year in terms of a release date. So that was pretty wild. It was within 24 hours.
Wow. So we have one more download for a Yellowstone-centric question. But I want to get to, again, one thing I love about your scoring in Yellowstone is how you embody animals and horses, with the really interesting use of percussion, especially in this season.
Yeah, the percussion angle is the first 2 seasons actually didn't really have percussion by design, and in season 3 we are. But most of the percussion are things that are not traditionally percussion. Like, for instance, I'll hit Coleño with a bow onto a cello, or you'll take a charango, which it's a wooden version of what charangos used to be, armadillo shells, and the back, but no, they're not armadillos anymore. They're now wood. But you flip that over and you play it like a drum. So it's things that aren't like our traditional percussion. They're things that you would turn into percussion, and that all the percussion in Yellowstone is along those lines.
Now, we're waiting for a Yellowstone question, but in the meantime, Joseph Batt is a big fan of the Evil Tooth Fairy of Darkness Falls, one of your first and really fun movie and score. And he'd love to know, are there plans for an extension of that, or any other extended scores of yours coming up from any labels that you can talk about?
Oh, you mean like terms of scores that I'd done in the past that now would be... Yeah,
or that are in the works.
Yeah. Well, one that's in the works for sure is I've been waiting my score for Lego Universe. and that's one that I absolutely love. And it's crazy. It was like 10 years ago or something like that. And they just came to me. And so we're talking about that. And I think that's going to happen. Very excited about that. One of my favorite scores. And we definitely want to do kind of the ones that were missed back in the day and get everything out. I mean, I think there's like 90 movies or something like that I've scored. So it's a lot, but we, they're all special in their own way. So hopefully, for sure, man.
Now, Claude Pavel would love to know again. You mentioned a bit again about this kind of great, unique studio sound that you had before you got these massive orchestras. But what kind of virtual instruments are you working with now? Because until they can kind of really figure out what they're doing, it really seems that film scoring might go back to the way you started.
Yeah, well, right now, I mean, I just print mastered a movie today. For Disney and Warner Brothers called Clouds, which I scored with Justin Baldoni directing it, and the entire thing was done under COVID. I started
Wow.
and finished it. Like it's great. So in terms of virtual instruments, I mean, the thing is that I play a lot. I play manually, just tons of instruments. So I'm playing cellos and things like that, and guitars and anything you can pluck, bow or play, or drums or a piano. I have pianos and Rhodes and tons of things. I have a lot of outboard synth gear. I love vintage synths from the 80s and stuff. So there's so many instruments just around in my studio that I can pick up and play, that it keeps it human. But I love going inside and tweaking on tech as well. So it's everything from soft synths to samplers to and resonators and all sorts of things that you can do to make something sound different and interesting. Take a piano and play it and then run it backwards and all sorts of chorusing things. I have pedal boards everywhere that are like vintage pedals where you can run vocal. I sang on almost every score that I do. Somehow like a vocal thing and harmonizes instead of a pad. I've been doing that since Six String and Panic and all that, but Clouds, I sing on it a lot. Lots of guitars. So yeah, there's plenty of things you can do that are really interesting, and really orchestra should be a very specific thing. It shouldn't be just the automatic go-to, oh, we've got a movie, let's do orchestra. It should be whatever works for the story and whatever is going to make the emotions of the scene work the best. So, that's why it's kind of going back and forth. But hopefully that we can continue. I just want everybody to be safe.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, again, how are you going to get chorus and the brass? But it's a good thing that you sing your own
Yeah,
vocals. I mean, I
choir
always thought it
is
was like a different singer.
yeah. I agree, man. It's not easy. Look, and I don't even know. We'll see next year. I mean, everything's been totally thrown. If I was going to be touring, I was going to be doing concerts all over the world this summer and fall through Asia and everywhere. And it just, I mean, it's just everything's turned upside down.
Now, Nick Saya over at Nick Saya Productions wants to know, you mentioned that you're working with another writer on Yellowstone. How, essentially, with, very prolific composers, who often work with other, writers to get stuff done. What's your trick to kind of making it seem like it's a kind of one person who's doing this in terms of just the musical consistency, when you're working with another writer?
I tend to seek out and attract kind of similar vibes so when I've worked with like Keith Power or Brett or different people on the series, they're people that often, and I did a movie with Brett as well, 5 Feet Apart, that very much they're multi-instrumentalists, and I feel like it's almost like being in a band. So it's not so much trying to get them to just sound like me. They naturally kind of have similar instincts, but at the same time, there's something extra that's brought to it that's interesting. Like you get to bounce ideas off someone, because being there can be very like isolated and lonely in a way. So it's really nice when you get to someone personally that's great but super talented like Brett or Keith, and you get to work with them, and it ends up being just like this amazing experience, as it is with Yellowstone. I mean, I season 3, yeah, the music, I love it, and you're able to kind of work in a more ensemble kind of way, which ironically during COVID is almost, I'm going the other way. It's more ensemble than the other seasons, even though COVID's happening. So it's not without irony that I say that.
Yeah. Now, Paul Marquand would love to know, how long does it take you to arrange a piece of music for a show like Yellowstone versus a movie?
The same. It's the piece is done when it's done, right? So I don't really I don't really rush it or procrastinate on writing. It's more like I just buckle down. And the thing is, I think naturally, if you're a film composer, one thing that you probably are going to have naturally is you write fairly quickly, just as your preferred mode, not even thinking about it. You just kind of do that. It's very different than if I had 3 years to work on a symphony or something that was 35 minutes. You in the back of your head, you don't get into film composing unless you just naturally sit down and start writing quickly. So it's not rushing. There's a difference between writing quickly and rushing. It's I never feel really I'm a night owl. I don't really like to sleep. I would rather be in the studio writing music. So it's not a chore or a job, and I've never really feel like I'm rushing. It's more just I want to get the ideas out properly, and sometimes I feel the clock in that way. But it can range. I've written things that are very long. Taken a long time to write, 2 minutes, and then I've written like 38 minutes in a weekend before for orchestra that I conducted like the next day on the Monday. So it's just however long it takes, I guess, is the answer. I know that's a non-answer, but that is the answer.
That's a pretty good one. So, and I think for both of us, Jerry Goldsmith was a huge influence. And one of the first scores where you really proved you had the epic chops was when you wrote the replacement score for Timeline.
Yeah.
Now, an instrument that Jerry would love to use, especially in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, is a blaster beam. So Leif Sanchez would like to know, would you ever like to use a blaster beam?
I would. Oh, I love the blaster beam. The I mean, like that. That Star Trek original sound. It's so unwieldy. It's like a big giant, but it is hella cool. I love the blaster beam. And yeah, Jerry. Jerry was so multi-talented, and then he would write these amazing melodies, but then he would do just the craziest shit that was just amazing, where you go outside the lines. And I love Jerry. I mean, in fact, I was scoring Star Trek at the time that I got the call for Timeline. So it was literally, I was doing something that was related to Jerry when I got the call to replace Jerry on a score, which to me was like the scariest thing in the world. This was a long time ago. This is 16 years ago. And I'm getting the call. I mean, come on, ridiculous. So, and I got to know him after that, actually. And then of course following up in his shoes has been a thing for me, with Rambo, he did those scores, and Alien, for Alien versus Predator, and then of course the Universal logo. So Jerry, not only am I a huge fan, but I have worked and been able to dive into his own music and conduct it and create my own music with his music and have our themes work together, and especially in the 3 Rambo films.
Oh man, that last one, dude, the whole mind thing, talk about sweet over and out violence with just how well that score worked, in the sense of this gigantic, exceptionally brutal sequence the whole movie was building to.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was operatic, I gotta say. I mean, that last scene is just incredible, and of course the last shot, and then scene, and boy, the thing that I love is that there's almost now, even in my own mind with the Rambo, is now when I work so much on the Rambo music that now it's blurred to me the themes, like Jerry and me. I'm like, wait, is that Jerry? Is that me? It's this really, for being such a fan since I was like 5 years old of Jerry Goldsmith, having our music just kind of merge like that is, even in my own life, is a joy.
Now, Carrie Lee Marshall Cookery would love to know, how has your creative process changed over the years, especially in terms of the way you write thematically?
Yeah. Just the more I learn, the more I realize that I want to learn. The more you know, the less you know. So it's kind of, as I go and I study music, and I just listen and kind of open my mind to different kinds of music, and I think it's just building upon a foundation that was there, that I always kind of had it, this love of music, but that love of music always being creator and fan at the same time, enthusiast, aficionado, and just reading orchestration and listening to music that I'm not familiar with. It's shaped the way that I approach it. It lets me know that I can break a rule in this way, and then I think maybe I can break it my own way and create something new. And that's where you get those things that are associated with you specifically, where saying the word Tylerism on a message board for the first time is always interesting, but I see that all. Yeah, he's using one of those Tylerisms or whatever, things that I kind of just came up with, but it was because I saw other composers and other musicians kind of, draw outside the lines and find their own identity by not being like someone else. It's almost learning by example. So that I've tried to really, actually, I haven't tried. It's just, I think it's developed over the years, in the sense, because I'm always hungry to learn new things. I'll always be a student of music. That is my primary kind of residency, is students.
Now, it's interesting because, it didn't seem like the villains could get any more horrendous than the ending of the second season, when you had these two brothers. You have white power. White power meth heads.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know what happens? Well, I don't want to say, but the way. Okay, so the evil, the dark side seeps in from unexpected places. I think that's where you are on season 3. All of a sudden, and this is what I was kind of mentioning, the thing about series, and it's on season 3 for some reason kind of just blossom, is because the dark side of it comes from unexpected places. So it's not necessarily going to be the meth head white supremacist asshat that you hate from the get-go. You hate them from the get-go. But now it's getting really interesting the way it develops, and you find like, wow, what is going on here? And the confusion creates drama, and in a really spectacular way, because it is controlled confusion. Taylor is puppet stringing this all along in a way that I kind of wish we were saying this at the end, so I could speak about some of it, but I want to. I know no spoilers. Yeah, I know what you don't know, but I know you're gonna like it.
Now, it's interesting. I think when we all realized things were really going south in a big way was when the new Fast and Furious movie was severely moved I mean, what this is
here.
like, your umpteenth entry into this franchise. And
Yeah.
had you even been able to do the score when they decided to push the film, and tell us a little bit about what we can expect whenever it's going to get here?
Yeah, I mean, the film is amazing. Justin Lin is back as the director, and he really brought this series into making it not so much more than it was. It kind of was more of a car fun race for pink slips kind of thing. Still super fun, but wow, it's just expanded in this whole universe. It's like it's incredible. It's like dramatic, it's moving, it's really emotional, this one, and it's spectacular. It's like massive, really crazy. And yeah, I had just finished writing when COVID hit. And like I was mentioning, it was that we were within a day away from me conducting and or recording the score, the final score, like with the orchestra, like the score, and but yeah, all of a sudden, and we remember the days right when quarantine happened, like things happened so quickly. Like, wait, are we going to go and elect this? Every day not every day, every hour you would see something in the news that would update the whole thing, and then we were told we had to wait for a year. Is coming out a full year later, and so wow, that's wild. Talk about unexpected, but lovely people from top to bottom. I love Justin. He's great, and the movies. I mean, the movie's incredible. It's unbelievable. So next year you'll see what I'm talking about. It's just taking a while.
Well, I can't wait. Now, Jesus Ignacio Medina Cordero has a question, a technical question. What is your process of getting all of your music from the DAW to notation?
Oh yeah, so the going from the DAW. So the process is not always the same, honestly. It depends. I often, for orchestral score, I do mock-ups, and I'll make orchestral mock-ups so it sounds like the orchestra, so the director can kind of get an idea of what the score is going to sound like. And then I do it old school. I actually record, with the even with the samples, and get it recorded, and then do takedowns where manually listen and write the music out, as opposed to just relying on MIDI. Because I think if you rely just on the MIDI, then you end up often kind of relaxing and letting the translation between the MIDI and a DAW turn into finale or Sibelius, and you get errors. And when you go to conduct, you're like, oh my God, what's going on here? So it's actually, I do it kind of more old school, like it's really the style is pencil and paper. And often it just is pencil and paper. If I'm working with the director that's like, look, just do the scene. I don't need to see the mock-up. I want it to be this or that. I'll see it to scoring stage. Or then sometimes the limitations that a DAW gives you by writing on samples don't have those limitations in your own brain. So you can just write anything, and you don't have to be limited by the fact that samples are not as dexterous as live players are. So there's no one path from the inception of the idea to conducting it on the scoring stage, but overall it's pretty analog and pretty old school.
Now, Carrie Lee Marshall Corkery, I'm sorry, I apologize. Actually has another question. What is coming up? I mean, I imagine that you have directed your own movie now, I think.
Oh, right. So there's a lot coming up. There's a lot coming. So talking about that first, Are We Dreaming, which is, I'm directing, but it's really a live cinematic concert experience, almost in the way like Fantasia was. It's kind of like Fantasia meets 2001: A Space Odyssey. Really visually impactful. It's a mind warp. You go through like wormholes. You end up on the other side of the universe. But it's done live with music, and I'm doing music, and the show is different every single time. So the amount of footage and film that there is like 5 hours. But then the journey is always different. So that 5 hours is in a different order. Scenes are like, and it's kind of like every time you come to see it, it's going to be different. It's super ambitious. It's like kind of that IMAX style, big, huge dome flying through space, but beautiful and about human empathy and you know, aspirational, but it goes far, far into the future. It's a message from ourselves, from far in the future, that's telling us how to kind of get there. And you have time dilation and all sorts of crazy stuff. Anyway, that's very exciting. Since that has to be done live, that's a 2021 thing, but we've been working on it for a year already. And I'm doing the visuals and editing and color timing myself, and I work with cinematographers and doing the music as well. Obviously, huge project. Clouds, a movie for Disney that's coming out in October, or it's going to stream most likely because of COVID. Justin Baldoni's movie. I have DJ Caruso's movie, which is a Western, but it's a Western in the Old West as opposed to a modern Western. Doing that movie, Those Who Wish Me Dead, which is a action suspense drama by Taylor Sheridan, the director of Yellowstone. And then Fast and Furious is coming out as well. And then Escape Room 2 for Sony Pictures, teaming up with Adam Robitel, that director, again, to do the sequel to that. So there's a million things.
Awesome. Actually, that question was from Tyson El Nesso. My apologies for you there, Tyson. So here's a really great question from Magnus Otto Ottoson that kind of wraps us up a little bit. What do you think the most valuable lesson you've learned from making your film score, your first film score, that you brought with you to this point?
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So my first film score is such a unique experience because I was learning on the fly and I was making it up as I went along because I didn't go to film school. And so I didn't know the terminology. So they would throw terms at me that I had no idea what they were talking about, but I didn't want to let on that I didn't know. So they would say like, oh, do you want your reels broken down into VITSI or LTC? I'd be like, that sounded like a complete foreign language to me. And I'd just be like, I'm going to go with the latter. Can you send me that one? You know, so I was just kind of winging it. And the thing is that I really loved that score and the process. So my thought that I pulled from that was like, you know what? There is nothing you can't learn. It really, literally, it does not matter what it is or how difficult. If it's within human, the human range of being able to, you're going to be able to figure it out. So never be afraid of doing something that you've never done before. So that is why I love doing so many different kinds of things, like a jazz score for Crazy Rich Asians or an Indian score for Partition or whatever it might be. I think as an artist, I think being safe is artistic death. You want to be a little bit scared and try things that you've never done before. And that's going to keep things alive. And so that's what I learned. I've taken that to heart ever since day one.
So, you know, you're kind of like an excellent example of a sci-fi, you know, movie geek who has made it. You've done pretty good for yourself, while still
Thanks,
really
brother.
having a kind of love for this. What's it like? You know, I mean, I know that I'm a huge fan of Yellowstone. I just cannot wait to see what's going to happen every week. What's it like, essentially, being a fan of a movie, you know, Star Trek or a franchise, and actually getting to work in it? Is it harder being a fan that you have to kind of like take the fan out of yourself to score this stuff?
I cannot take the fan out. I so fanboy on that stuff. I mean, Marvel. I collected Marvel comics as a kid. Like, I have worked on so many things. I was a fan. Children of Dune. The first thing that I wrote that was scory was when I was 12 years old, when I read the book Dune Messiah and Dune and Children of Dune. I read the series, the Frank Herbert series, and I wrote music for it. I was like 12 years old, and then I ended up, years later, I got the call from Greg Yaitanes directing it, saying, hey, Disney's going to put money into doing this sequel, you know, Dune. Are you interested in scoring? I'm like, what are you talking about? Did you read my mind? That's like my favorite book, you know, it's a science fiction book. So I ended up using part of what I wrote when I was 12 in the final score. It's actually the opening. Salusa Secundus is the thing that I wrote when I was 12. And so as a tribute to kind of dreaming big as a child, you know, and watching sci-fi movies and collecting comics. So Iron Man, Thor, Avengers, Star Trek, huge fan. Top to bottom, Dune, Rambo, Aliens, Predator. I mean, what? It is really crazy that I end up kind of scoring so many things. That Formula One, I wrote the Formula One theme, right? That's my favorite sport. I've been a fanatic for like 20 years, where I'd watch practice, qualifying, the race every weekend, knew every driver. I would get tapes bootlegged of the practice sessions because they didn't air it in the United States. And then I end up doing the theme for Formula One. That's still the theme to this day. It's really been, I've been very fortunate. Maybe somehow I'm attracted, or somehow I put it out there enough that I'm into these kind of, these things. I'm a fan first, and that'll never go away. And that's why I'm so enthusiastic about doing these things. It's a good thing I have an agent, or else I'd just be like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that, whatever. So what about whatever, don't worry about it. You know what I mean? Because it's really, I feel the best part about it is that I get to see what happens to Tony Stark before everybody else does. In a weird way, like I remember doing the Borg theme on Star Trek and thinking, wow, I get to see before everyone else does. All these science fiction fans like me are dying to know what's going to happen. And I get to see it like 5 months before everybody. That to me was enough of a reason to score it, any of these things. But yeah, what do I say, man? I feel very fortunate that I get to do what I love, and that I happen to be a true fan of this stuff.
Well, I am, and I know a lot of people are, and I just want to give you a huge thanks for joining us on Film Music Live. Yellowstone, Sunday nights on Paramount. I just cannot wait to see how we're going to be 3 episodes in. I just cannot wait to see how this is all going to unfurl, and just how low the Duttons are going to go. And you know how bad it's going to get.
Crazy. It's crazy. You're going to love it.
Well, I want to give a huge thanks, big shout out to you, your team, to Lakeshore Records, to Bobby Johnson for monitoring questions, for Mark Northam for producing. And I want everyone to be here on Tuesday, July 21st at 4 o'clock. We're going to have Terrence Blanchard on, who's going to talk about his amazing work on The Five Bloods and HBO's Perry Mason. And Brian, I just send you lots of great vibes. If anyone has badass studio, you know, and the skills, the skills to go back to the bomb shelter, to, you know, get right back to it with the stuff they actually started out on, and to make it keep going. Yeah. I know it is you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for tuning in and asking questions.
Thank you, Lakeshore Records. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, right on. Peace. Thanks, brother.